I'm leaving you for my boss. He's successful, unlike you. My name is Liam Carter. At 45, I had spent 15 years building a career as a financial consultant at Veltri Dynamics in Chicago. I specialized in high-net-worth portfolios, a quiet, methodical job that most people, including my wife Melissa, found boring. The call came on a Tuesday night in March. Melissa was supposedly at a pharmaceutical sales conference in Miami. I was in our kitchen at home, reviewing client documents, when my phone lit up with her name. The story you're about to hear is about love, betrayal, and revenge. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and comment with where you're watching from. It really helps our channel grow. Thank you. The bluish glow of the screen cut through the dim kitchen. Outside, a light March rain tapped against the windows with a monotonous rhythm that had always calmed me. Not tonight. My hand hesitated over the phone for a fraction of a second. Something about the time of the call, 10:40 at night, was outside her usual pattern of calling me during conference lunch breaks. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice strangely calm. "I'm not coming home." I dropped my pen. It rolled across the solid wood table, the one we'd picked out together at an antique shop in Lincoln Park, and fell to the floor with a hollow thud that echoed in the silent kitchen. "What's going on? I've met someone. It's been happening for a while." Her voice had that rehearsed tone she used with difficult clients, each word measured and controlled, as if she were reading from a mental script prepared days in advance. "It's Richard, my boss." The name hung in the air between us. Richard Price. I knew him vaguely from company parties, a man in his late 40s with easy smiles and handshakes that were a little too firm, always wearing expensive Italian suits and talking about his connections in Miami like they were personal trophies. I didn't say anything, just listened to her breathe on the other end of the line. Behind her, I could make out the muffled sounds of ambient music and distant conversations. She wasn't in her hotel room. She was somewhere public, maybe a bar, with liquid courage still running through her veins. He gets me. He sees my potential. She paused and then twisted the knife. "I've already emptied our joint investment account. My lawyer said it was the smartest move. The joint account we had built over 12 years of marriage, the one she rarely checked but whose benefits she enjoyed." My hands began to sweat, but not from panic. It was something colder. Recognition. Like when you finally see the complete pattern in a spreadsheet you've been analyzing for months. "I understand," I said softly. "Is that all?" "You understand?" Her voice faltered for a moment, the first genuine emotion in the conversation. There was surprise in it, maybe even disappointment at my calm reaction. She had expected shouting, pleading, maybe desperate promises to change. "Take care of yourself, Melissa." I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the counter. The cold marble under my fingers anchored me to reality. For a moment, only the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then I opened my laptop and logged into our financial portal. The screen loaded with the frustrating slowness of the bank's secure connection. Every second seemed to stretch as the digits gradually appeared. She had initiated a transfer. Right, $125,000 from what she thought was our main investment fund. The specific amount told me she had consulted someone, probably the lawyer she mentioned, someone who calculated exactly 50% of the visible assets. What appeared on my screen confirmed what I already knew. The transfer was pending approval. My approval. A small technical detail she had completely overlooked in her rush to secure the money before breaking the news. A rookie mistake for someone who prided herself on her business acumen. I closed the laptop without doing anything. The decision could wait. For the first time in hours, my breathing was perfectly steady. I got up and walked to the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. Chicago never slept. There was always movement, always change. But the numbers were constant. Reliable in a way people never were. 6 months earlier, I'd noticed the first signs. Weekend conferences that didn't appear on her company's calendar when I casually checked the PharmaVenture website. Dinner charges in downtown Chicago, on nights she was supposedly out of town. Small inconsistencies on the credit card statements I reviewed monthly as part of our financial routine. A missed call from Richard at 11 at night that she fumbled to explain, saying something about a crisis with an important client that sounded too fake even for her to believe. Being a numbers guy has its advantages. You spot patterns where others see only random coincidences. You learn to read between the lines of the data. Each duplicate charge, each inconsistent timeline, each explanation that didn't quite add up became a data point in a larger equation I was quietly building. 3 months ago, I had restructured our accounts, creating a new joint account with a modest balance of about $250,000, while silently moving our real assets, over $800,000, into an exclusive investment trust in my name. The paperwork was in my desk drawer, signed by Melissa without her ever reading the details. I remember the day I put the documents in front of her during a Saturday breakfast. She was checking messages on her phone, sipping her cappuccino without looking up. "I just need you to sign here, honey. I'm reorganizing our investments for better tax optimization." She barely glanced at it, signing with her hurried script while typing a response to someone with her other hand. Probably to him. She was too busy texting under the table during our last few dinners together. The blue glow of the phone illuminating her face as she smiled at the screen in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years. The system was working exactly as designed. The withdrawal she initiated required dual authentication for amounts over $10,000, a safeguard I had specifically requested from the bank manager 3 months ago. Explaining it was a security measure against fraud. He had readily agreed, praising my prudence. The next morning, she would discover what pending really meant. I could almost picture her expression when the bank notification arrived. That red line stating the transaction required additional approval. The frustration, then the anger, finally the panic when she realized her carefully orchestrated plan had a fatal flaw. Melissa and I met 17 years ago at a financial conference in Denver. The event was at the Grand Hyatt, one of those elegant places with crystal chandeliers and white-gloved waiters. She worked for PharmaVenture, a rising company with a promising line of diabetes medications. I first noticed her during a lecture on biotech investments. She was in the second row, taking frantic notes in a red leather notebook, occasionally raising her hand to ask incisive questions that impressed even the speaker. There was an energy about her that contrasted with my more restrained nature. We properly met at the evening cocktail reception, where she approached me directly after overhearing my conversation with a colleague about hedging strategies for pharmaceutical stocks. "Do you really understand this market?" she had said, her brown eyes shining with genuine interest. "Tell me more about that diversification theory you mentioned." We talked for 2 hours that night, completely forgetting the networking we were supposed to be doing. She was ambitious, sharp, and knew how to engage with people in a way that felt both natural and strategic. I was quiet, analytical, and noticed details others missed, like the way she tilted her head when she was truly interested in something, or how her hands moved expressively when she talked about her career goals. We balanced each other. "You bring the network, I bring the financial stability," she used to joke in the early years. It sounded like an affectionate joke at the time, not the cold transaction those words implied. When we married 2 years later in a small ceremony at St. Teresa's Chapel, we mapped out our future with the same precision I used for my clients' portfolios. Hiking trips in Vale on the weekends, where the thin air and the scent of pine gave us a sense of escape from the city. Monthly dinners with colleagues, alternating between her professional circles and mine. A meticulous schedule for building our investment accounts, with specific targets for each quarter. Children by the 5th year of marriage too, if possible, raised with the best education Chicago could offer. But the children never came. After 3 years of attempts that gradually became mechanical and tense, filled with thermometers and ovulation calendars, the doctor's diagnosis was delivered in his sterile office at a downtown clinic. The white walls, the smell of antiseptic, the muffled sound of the air conditioner all contributed to that atmosphere of an ending. My low sperm count made natural conception unlikely. The doctor used technical terms, charts, statistics showing our chances were less than 5%. Numbers I understood perfectly, but this time, I hated them with every fiber of my being. Melissa cried in the car afterward, silent tears that streamed down her cheeks as she stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. The clinic's underground parking garage was dark and cold, our breaths fogging the car windows. I held her hand, feeling it tremble slightly, and promised we would. explore other options. IVF, adoption, whatever she wanted. We'll have our family, I had whispered, fully believing those words. We never did. The conversation about alternatives was always postponed. Next month, when things at work calm down, after the June conference, when we have more time to properly research the options. The excuses piled up like dust until we stopped mentioning it altogether. Instead, she threw herself into her career with an intensity that bordered on obsession. More conferences, some lasting for weeks in cities like Miami, New York, Barcelona. More client dinners that stretched late into the night. More evenings working late in the home office, the blue light of her laptop illuminating her focused face while I went to bed alone. I focused on growing my client list at Veltri, building a reputation for steady, discrete returns that outpaced market volatility. My clients called me the calculator, a nickname that was half joke, half compliment. They trusted me because they knew every decision was based on cold analysis and hard data, never on emotion or impulse. Our house, a 3-story brownstone in Lincoln Park, we bought in our second year of marriage, became a waypoint between her trips and my long hours at the office. We left notes on the fridge about bills to pay and repairs needed. We exchanged quick texts about logistics. Hi, bye, I need money for groceries, transferred, thanks. The first real crack, the one that couldn't be ignored or rationalized, appeared 3 years ago. I had planned a surprise weekend in Vail for our 12th wedding anniversary. I booked the same lodge where we spent our honeymoon, the one with fireplaces in the rooms, and breakfast served on the balcony overlooking the mountains. I even bought her a new dress, navy blue from the boutique she always admired on Michigan Avenue. When I told her, showing her the reservations with an expectant smile, she hesitated. It was only for a second, but I saw it. That flash of panic in her eyes before the rehearsed look of regret took over. Liam, I would love to, but she bit her lower lip. A gesture she always made when she was about to disappoint me. I already committed to a sales retreat that same weekend. It's with the executive team, including the new regional director. I can't just cancel. It would be political. You understand, right? I understood. Or I pretended to. Of course, no problem. We can reschedule. We never rescheduled. I went to Vail alone. I walked the same trails we had once enjoyed together, where she used to stop to photograph wildflowers, and I would point out constellations in the clear mountain night sky. Now I walked in silence, just the sound of my own footsteps on the dirt path and the distant song of birds I couldn't identify. When she called that Saturday night, around 10 o'clock, I was sitting alone on the lodge balcony, drinking red wine and watching the town lights twinkle in the valley below. Hey honey, how is it? Her voice sounded too cheerful, forced. In the background I could hear male laughter and loud music, something that definitely didn't sound like a serious corporate retreat. It's great, I lied. How's the retreat? Productive. Very productive. We have a full slate of sessions tomorrow. But there was a beat too long before she said it, as if she was checking something or someone before answering. More cracks followed in the subsequent months and years, each one widening the chasm between us. Separate vacations became the norm. She went to beaches in Florida with work friends, coming back tan and evasive about the details. I visited museums in Buenos Aires or stayed in Chicago, enjoying the silence of the empty house. Conversations were reduced to the logistics of the house or our finances. Did you pay the condo fees? Yes, is the cleaner coming on Thursday? I think so. I need the tax return statement. It's in the blue folder. Every interaction was a transaction, with no depth, no real connection. Physical intimacy dwindled to occasional, perfunctory encounters that happened maybe once a month, usually after a social event where we'd had too much to drink. They were mechanical, silent, and quickly concluded like items being checked off a to-do list. Afterward, she would roll over, check her phone one last time, and fall asleep. Then came Richard Price, transferred from the Atlanta branch to become her new regional director 2 years ago. Tall, hair slicked back with too much gel, teeth too white to be natural, always exuding that expensive cologne that probably cost more than my monthly rent in college. Suddenly, Melissa was volunteering for every sales committee, every national and international conference, every special project that might cross his desk. She changed outfits 3 times before morning meetings, trying on combinations and asking me which one looked more professional. She started waking up earlier to go to the gym, came home later, always with that frantic energy of someone living two lives. He values my opinion, she would say during our rare conversations, her eyes shining in a way they didn't when she looked at me. He thinks I'm being wasted in my current role. Says I have leadership potential that's being underutilized. I noticed the change in her texting habits too. Before she would leave her phone lying around the house, sometimes even asking me to check a message for her. Now it was always with her, always face down on any surface. She would leave the room to take calls, her voice dropping to a whispered, intimate tone that sent a chill down my spine. Emails she used to read aloud during breakfast, laughing about some funny situation with a client, were now password protected on her laptop. If I walked behind her, she would quickly minimize the windows, the reflexive movement of someone with something to hide. Classic signs I'd seen in other failing marriages. I knew at least 3 colleagues who had gone through difficult divorces, each one starting exactly like this. The same justifications about important work, the same patterns of evasive behavior, the same small lies that accumulated into an inevitable avalanche. But I never expected to see it in my own marriage. Not after everything we had built together, all the careful decisions, all the meticulous plans for our shared future. I didn't confront her. Confrontation would be emotional, messy, unproductive. Instead, I did what I do best. I observed, I noted, and I prepared silently and methodically. I documented the patterns in a hidden, password-protected spreadsheet on my computer. With a generic file name that wouldn't attract attention, Market Volatility Analysis 2024. Inside, each row represented an anomaly. Dates of charges at expensive downtown Chicago restaurants that didn't match her calendar. Locations that didn't align with the official work itinerary she sometimes mentioned casually. Cash withdrawals from our accounts that far exceeded our agreed-upon combined spending limits. The data points clustered. Thursday, September 19th. Melissa said she was in a meeting until 9. Dinner charge at a Linear at 10:15 p.m. Monday, October 7th. Supposedly a conference in Milwaukee. A hotel charge in Chicago, the Peninsula Hotel. The same hotel where Richard posted a photo on Instagram with the caption, "A well-deserved rest after an intense week." When she left her email open one Sunday morning, while showering after her morning run, I didn't hesitate. There it was, a hotel reservation confirmation for a King Executive Suite at the Grand Hyatt in Chicago for the weekend of January 24th to 26th, booked under the names Melissa Santos Carter and Richard August Price. The date corresponded exactly to the weekend. She said she'd be at a mandatory corporate training in Indianapolis. Hey, juez. Coldness spread through my chest, not hot anger, but something icy and calculated. I took a discreet photo of the screen with my phone and closed the laptop exactly as she had left it, with the same tabs open, the cursor in the same position. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in a white towel, her hair dripping on the hardwood floor, I was sitting on the sofa reading the newspaper as if nothing had happened. "What a beautiful day," she commented, looking out the window at the January sun shining brightly over Chicago. "I think I'll go to the mall later. Do you need anything?" "No, I'm good, thanks." She smiled, that automatic empty smile we now used with each other, and went into the bedroom to get dressed. I didn't say a word about what I'd discovered. Instead, I adjusted my plans. Every new piece of information was a variable added to the equation I was silently building. And every equation eventually has to balance. The morning after her call from Miami, the morning that marked the official end of our marriage, I sat in my home office staring at the transfer request, still blinking on my screen. The cold light from the monitor illuminated my face in the still dark office. It was 5:45 a.m. I hadn't slept well, though my insomnia wasn't from shock or grief, but from the cold anticipation of watching my plans unfold exactly as predicted. $125,000 pending approval. The number flashed in red, awaiting my decision. It was almost poetic how she had miscalculated, how her confidence in her own shrewdness had blinded her to the technical details that governed our financial world. With one click, I could deny it immediately. With another, I could approve it and watch her walk away with a significant portion of what I had built, over 15 years of careful work and calculated investments. Every dollar in that account represented hours of consulting, sacrificed weekends, and tough decisions that prioritized financial security over immediate gratification. I did neither, not yet. Timing was part of the strategy, allowing her anxiety to build, her certainties to begin to crack. Instead, I took out the physical folder I had prepared 3 months earlier, when the signs had become too undeniable to ignore. It was filed in the locked drawer of my desk, between old tax documents where no one would think to look. The folder was dark blue, thick with documentation, each page organized chronologically with colored tabs. Inside was the complete documentation of our financial restructuring, the one Melissa had signed without reading while checking messages on her phone. The new trust in my name, registered exclusively with my social security number, contained $870,000. The true bulk of our investments, accumulated over years of steady returns and disciplined reinvesting, was now legally separate from the joint account she thought she had emptied. The account she had accessed contained only our most recent investments from the last 6 months, plus a few lower yield funds I had kept there specifically to give the illusion of it being our primary account. To someone who only glanced at statements superficially, as Melissa always did, it looked like everything. The doorbell rang at 8:32 a.m., interrupting my review of the documents. The sound echoed through the empty house, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity won out over caution. On my porch stood Vanessa, Melissa's closest friend and a team colleague at PharmaVenture. I had known Vanessa almost as long as I'd known Melissa, a woman with short hair and an easy laugh who had always been kind to me at social events, but whose loyalty clearly lay with my wife. Her face was tense now, uncomfortable, her eyes avoiding mine. She was clutching the strap of a brown leather handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. "Can I come in, Liam?" I stepped aside without a word, a silent invitation. She entered hesitantly, looking around the living room as if seeing it for the first time, though she had been here dozens of times for dinners and parties. I led her to the kitchen, where I poured 2 cups of coffee that neither of us would drink. The ritual of hospitality was automatic, something to fill the awkward silence while she gathered her thoughts. Steam rose from the mugs, dissipating into the cool morning air. "She told me to come get a few of her things," Vanessa said finally, still gripping her purse strap even after placing it on the table. "She's not coming back, Liam, I know." My voice came out calmer than I expected, almost detached. Vanessa's eyes wouldn't meet mine. She stared at the coffee cup, the marble countertop, the refrigerator, anything but my face. She asked me to get her jewelry box from the bedroom, the wooden one with the mother-of-pearl inlay, and her winter clothes from the closet. The wool coats, the leather boots. You know about Richard. It wasn't a question, but a statement. I needed to hear it from her, to confirm what I already knew. Vanessa flinched visibly, her shoulders hunching as if trying to make herself smaller, less visible. Yes, I tried to talk her out of it, Liam. Seriously, I tried several times, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced this was what she needed. How long have you known? She hesitated, and in that silence, I knew it was worse than I had imagined. 8 months, maybe more. She finally looked at me, and there was genuine sorrow in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Liam. You didn't deserve this. 8 months, almost a full year of elaborate lies, of double lives, all while she slept next to me on the nights she was home. Argued with me over whether we should replace the living room furniture or redo the garden. Planned our Thanksgiving holiday as if we were a normal couple with a normal future. The jewelry is in the bedroom safe," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The combination is 0712. Our wedding date, ironically. She always knew it. I never changed it." Vanessa nodded but didn't move toward the bedroom. Her fingers tapped nervously on the table, an anxious rhythm that revealed there was more. She also wanted me to check if her transfer went through. The words came out in a rush, as if she wanted to get rid of them as quickly as possible. There it was, the real reason for the morning visit. It wasn't the winter clothes Melissa could easily replace with her generous new salary. It wasn't the jewelry box that, while sentimentally valuable, wasn't irreplaceable. It was the money. It was always about the money. Melissa had sent her as a scout to see if the plan had worked, if the $125,000 was secure in her account before she had to face me again. Typical of her, using other people to do her dirty work while keeping her own hands clean. I opened my laptop right there on the kitchen table, taking my time, letting the system boot up with its characteristic slowness. Vanessa watched, her discomfort growing with every second. I logged into the banking portal, typing my complex 16-character password with deliberate precision, and turned the screen so she could see it clearly. "Pending approval," I said softly, pointing to the bright red status. "Dual authentication for amounts over $10,000. It's in our joint account agreement, Clause 7, Paragraph 3. Requires confirmation from both account holders for significant transactions." Vanessa read the screen, her eyes widening as she understood the implications. "She's going to be furious," she whispered almost to herself. "That's her choice," I replied, closing the laptop with a soft click. She chose to initiate an unauthorized transfer. She chose not to discuss our financial situation with me before attempting to empty the account. The consequences of those choices are just that, consequences. Vanessa was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was almost inaudible. She really believes Richard is going to take care of her, that he'll leave his wife, that they'll build a life together in Miami. He promised her a director-level position, autonomy, everything she's ever wanted. "And you believe that?" I asked, genuinely curious. Vanessa let out a short, humorless laugh. "I've worked at Pharma Venture for 12 years, Liam. I've seen Richard do this before, twice that I know of personally, probably more. He has a type, ambitious married women who are vulnerable to promises of professional recognition that their husbands supposedly don't offer." She shook her head. "But Melissa won't listen. She thinks she's different, that their affair is the real deal." After Vanessa left, carrying a Louis Vuitton suitcase I had given Melissa for her birthday 2 years ago, filled with designer clothes she would wear to impress her new lover, I was left alone in the silent house. The jewelry box remained in the safe. Vanessa hadn't had the nerve to get it after our conversation about the money. I drove to my office at Veltri Dynamics in downtown Chicago, navigating the morning traffic on autopilot. The 23-story mirrored glass building reflected the overcast sky, a gray mass that threatened rain but never delivered. My office was on the 17th floor, a modest but well-located room with a view of Michigan Avenue. The familiar routine of morning client calls and portfolio analysis suddenly felt strangely empty, as if I were playing a role in a play that no longer had meaning. I answered emails automatically, reviewed quarterly reports without really absorbing the information. My mind was elsewhere, calculating next steps, anticipating moves. At lunch, I declined my colleague's invitation to our usual sushi place and walked alone to my bank branch, the same one where I'd held my accounts for 15 years. The manager, Frank Peterson, saw me immediately in his glass-walled office with minimalist furniture. "I've come to initiate the next phase," I said simply, presenting the documents I had prepared. "I want to completely freeze the joint account, no transactions of any kind until a court order, and I want to transfer the exclusive trust to an even more protected management, something that requires multiple authorizations for access." Frank reviewed the paperwork with a professional expression, but I saw the curiosity in his eyes. He had enough experience to recognize the signs of a difficult divorce on the horizon. "We can do that today," he confirmed. "The freeze is effective immediately. The trust restructuring will take 48 business hours." Perfect. By 3 p.m., my phone showed 7 missed calls from Melissa, all within the last 40 minutes. The bank had notified both account holders of the account freeze, a standard protocol. I imagined her reaction upon reading the automated email, the frustration turning to fury as she realized that not only was the transfer blocked, but the entire account was now inaccessible. I ignored all the calls and drove directly to my lawyer's office in the Loop, a 20-minute drive that stretched to 40 due to typical Chicago traffic. The afternoon was turning gray, heavy clouds finally fulfilling their promise of rain. Thomas Frazier kept his office in a discreet 6-story building away from the corporate skyscrapers of downtown. He had been my client for a decade before becoming something close to a friend, as much as I allowed friendships. A man in his early 50s with perfectly cut gray hair and titanium-framed glasses, he exuded a quiet competence. His office was paneled in dark wood, with shelves full of legal codes and precedents. He offered me coffee, which I declined, and then I sat in the leather chair opposite his massive desk. He meticulously reviewed the documents I brought, separated by category in colored folders. Bank statements clearly showing Melissa's withdrawal attempt, complete with timestamps and exact amounts. Credit card records revealing duplicate expenses, charges at expensive restaurants and hotels in cities that perfectly matched Richard's travel itinerary, cross-referenced with the PharmaVenture corporate calendar I had obtained through contacts. Hotel confirmations that a careful search of her email had revealed. Reservations in both their names that left no room for innocent interpretation. "This is more than enough," Thomas said finally, organizing the papers into a new folder. Much more, in fact. Clear financial misconduct, abandonment of the marital home, evidence of an extramarital affair. He paused. "Illinois law is no fault for divorce, as you know, but this will weigh heavily in the financial settlement. No judge will favor someone who tried to secretly empty joint accounts." I nodded, feeling that strange emptiness in my chest where anger should have been burning. But there was no fire, only ice, only cold calculation, and the distant satisfaction of seeing a well-executed plan unfold. It wasn't about revenge, I realized. It never was. It was pure mathematics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, a fundamental principle on which I had built not only my career, but my entire worldview. "She thinks she emptied our accounts," I said, almost conversationally. "The main trust she didn't even touch. She doesn't even know it exists yet. Let her keep thinking that for now. Her ignorance is our strategic advantage." Thomas smiled slightly, the professional smile of someone who had seen hundreds of divorces and knew exactly how these games played out. "We'll file the petition first thing tomorrow morning. I have a judge who is particularly strict about attempts at financial fraud in separation proceedings." 3 days passed in a strange haze of artificial normalcy. I continued going to work, serving clients, reviewing portfolios as if my personal life wasn't imploding. Colleagues who noticed something different in my demeanor were politely stonewalled with vague smiles and changes of subject. Melissa's calls became increasingly frantic. 7 the first day, 15 the second, 23 the third. Text messages began to appear too, evolving from polite requests to angry demands to desperate pleas. "We need to talk. You can't just block me. That's my money too. Please, Liam, be reasonable." I ignored them all. Each unanswered message was an additional pressure point, leaving her to flounder in uncertainty. Basic negotiation strategy. Whoever gets desperate first loses. On the 4th day, I returned home after a particularly long meeting with clients from the real estate sector. It was almost 8 at night. The house was dark when I entered, and for a moment I thought I was alone. Then I noticed the faint light coming from the living room, and my body tensed immediately. Melissa was standing there, illuminated only by the corner lamp. She had used her key, the one she hadn't bothered to leave behind when she declared our marriage over by phone. Of course she hadn't. She still needed access, control. She looked different, thinner maybe, or just more tense. She wore a dark blue dress I didn't recognize, high heels and flawless makeup, as if she had come straight from some professional event. But there was a frantic look in her eyes that the expensive makeup couldn't hide. "What did you do?" she demanded without preamble, her sharp voice echoing in the empty house. "The money is gone, Liam. The account is frozen. I can't access anything." I placed my briefcase on the floor with deliberately calm movements, taking off my suit jacket and hanging it on the coat rack by the door. Every gesture was measured, refusing to be rushed by her urgency. "No, Melissa, the money isn't gone. It's exactly where it should be, under legal protection until the division of assets is properly formalized." She showed me her phone, with slightly trembling hands, displaying the bank message I knew by heart. "Account frozen by holder request. Transfer denied. Dual authorization required. Please contact your manager." "Fix this," she said, each word enunciated like a command. "Now, Liam, I need that money." I walked past her calmly into the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. I poured a glass of water from the fridge, drinking it slowly as she followed me, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor. "We need to talk about the divorce," I said finally, placing the glass in the sink. "Divorce?" The word came out as if it was the first time she had truly considered it concretely. I hadn't even... She stopped herself, realizing the trap. I intended to discuss this later, after I got settled with Richard. After you took the money, I clarified calmly. After you secured your financial safety at my expense. After you had every possible advantage in the negotiation. Her face hardened, the momentary vulnerability vanishing behind the professional mask she wore so well. Half of that money is mine, Liam, legally mine. I earned it just as much as you did. I worked, I contributed, I sacrificed. Did Richard tell you that? I asked softly, watching how she would react to his name being mentioned directly between us for the first time. The color drained from her face, leaving her foundation and blush floating artificially on pale skin. This isn't about him. She snapped back too quickly, too defensively. This is about us, about what we built together. It's about trust, Melissa. I corrected, keeping my voice neutral and factual. And about legally binding financial agreements that you tried to violate without consultation, without discussion, without even the courtesy of an honest conversation before trying to wipe me out financially. She switched tactics immediately, and I could see the exact moment it happened. Her shoulders artificially relaxed, her voice softened, and she took 2 steps toward me with a sudden expression of regret. Liam, I was emotional that night. Confused, scared of what I was doing. I didn't want to end things that way over the phone so coldly. We should have sat down, talked it through properly, like mature adults. She reached a hand out toward me. We can still do that. We can still resolve this civilly. The sudden shift to conciliation, the reasonable tone, the open body language. This was Melissa, the salesperson, who closed difficult contracts, who convinced skeptical doctors to change prescriptions, who turned objections into opportunities. I had watched her perfect this technique over years of business dinners where she charmed reluctant clients. But I knew all the tricks because I had been at every one of those dinners, watching silently as she worked. Thomas Fraser is handling the divorce, I said emotionlessly. You can have your lawyer contact him. All communication should go through our attorneys from now on. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. You already have a lawyer? You've already filed. Without telling me, without trying to work this out between us first, I filed yesterday morning. The process is already underway. You'll be officially served in a few days. She began pacing the room, her high heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floors she had insisted on installing last year, saying they gave the house class. Each step was a sonic puncture in the tension between us. You can't just lock me out of our money, Liam. That's financial abuse. Coercive control. I will fight this. I will take this to court and you will look like exactly what you are. A bitter man trying to punish his wife for being honest about her feelings. It's your legal right to contest it. I replied with the same maddening calm. The courts will decide based on evidence and legal precedent. I trust the system. My calmness seemed to enrage her more than any emotional argument would have. She looked around the room as if searching for something to break, something to physically express the fury that words could no longer contain. Her eyes landed on the picture frame on the mantelpiece. Our photo from Vale, taken 5 years ago when we were still pretending to be happy, before separate vacations became the norm, before Richard entered our lives. We were smiling in that photo, arm in arm at the top of a trail with misty mountains in the background. We looked genuinely happy. Or maybe we were just good at pretending even back then. She grabbed the frame with both hands and hurled it against the opposite wall with force. The glass shattered into 100 fragments that scattered across the hardwood floor like glittering crystals under the lamplight. The silver frame dented on impact, our smiling image now sliced by jagged cracks. Richard was right about you, she hissed, turning to face me with raw hatred in her eyes. You're pathetic, Liam. No real ambition, no drive, no passion for anything besides your spreadsheets and your dead numbers. He sees it so clearly how small you are, how I wasted my life trying to build something with someone who can't even fight for his own marriage. I looked at the broken frame on the floor, the shattered glass fragmenting my smiling face into dozens of distorted pieces. Curiously, I felt only a clinical distance. She was trying to provoke me, to make me lose control, to create a dramatic scene she could later use as a narrative. The unstable, explosive, threatening husband. I didn't give her the satisfaction. "I'm going to need your key back," I said calmly, gesturing to the keychain still in her hand. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice had lost some of its force. She rummaged in her designer handbag, the Prada I had given her last Christmas, and threw the key onto the coffee table hard enough to leave a scratch on the glass. "Not by a long shot, Liam. You will regret underestimating me." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that a picture on the entryway wall trembled. I heard the sound of her heels clattering down the front steps, then her car alarm disarming, the door slamming shut, the engine revving aggressively before she peeled away with screeching tires. I stood in the silence she left behind, hearing only the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then, methodically, I got the broom and dustpan from the utility closet and began to sweep up the broken glass. Each shard was carefully collected, with special attention to the smaller fragments that could easily be stepped on and forgotten. When I was done, the floor was immaculate again. No evidence of the emotional explosion, except for the faint scratch on the coffee table. I put the shards in a plastic bag and placed it in the trash. Then I poured myself 2 generous fingers of single malt scotch, the 18-year-old I saved for special occasions, and made a call to Thomas. She came to the house. I informed him when he answered on the second ring. Let herself in with her key. There was a confrontation. Be prepared for possible allegations that I was threatening or hostile. She's desperate now. What kind of confrontation? Thomas's voice was alert, professional. Anything that needs to be documented? She broke a picture frame, demanded access to the money, made accusations. I remained calm, asked for the key back, which she returned. All very civilized on my part. Good, maintain that posture. Thomas paused. Did she say anything useful? Any admissions? She confirmed that Richard is influencing her financial decisions. She used his words almost verbatim to describe me. And she made it clear she expected immediate access to the funds to get settled with him. Perfect. That reinforces the pattern of bad faith negotiations. Did she say the bank notified her about the rejected transfer? Yes, she mentioned it specifically. She wants access and she wants it now. Her urgency is palpable. Thomas gave a short, humorless chuckle. Good luck with that. The main trust is firewalled, and she doesn't even know it exists. When she finds out the true extent of the restructuring, it's going to be an interesting shock to watch. I hung up and drank the scotch slowly, savoring the warmth that spread down my throat and through my chest. The house was too quiet now, silent in a way that was different from normal loneliness. It was the silence of a chapter closing for good. The next morning, my assistant at Veltri, Paula, an efficient woman in her 30s who kept my schedule organized with military precision, placed a letter on my desk with a carefully neutral expression. The envelope was thick, expensive letterhead, the return address in gold embossed lettering. It arrived by courier 15 minutes ago, she said. Signature required. Looks important. Thank you, Paula. After she left, closing the door softly behind her, I opened the envelope. The letter inside bore the letterhead of King & Associates, a premium address in downtown Chicago on one of LaSalle Street's most expensive buildings, and 3 named partners with impressive credentials listed under their names. The letter, signed by Charles King in blue ink from an expensive fountain pen, demanded the immediate release of all marital assets for mutual access. It threatened legal action for financial abuse, coercive control, malicious restriction of legitimate access to shared property, and cited several legal precedents that supposedly supported Melissa's position. I read to the end, noting particularly that Richard August Price was copied on the correspondence, his corporate pharma venture email listed explicitly in the footer. So her boss was directly involved now, invested enough in the outcome to be included in legal communications, using his connections and resources to pressure me. This was valuable information. It showed his level of involvement, the depth of the relationship, and could potentially be used to demonstrate undue influence in marital financial matters. I scanned the letter, saved it to a specific digital folder marked Divorce Hostile Correspondence, and sent a copy to Thomas with a simple note. They're escalating. Richard is officially involved. That afternoon, Thomas filed our amended divorce petition, adding the detailed documentation of Melissa's attempt to empty the accounts without prior consultation or discussion, along with a formal request for a temporary restraining order, preventing her from entering our marital property again without prior notice or legal supervision. He also attached copies of the progressively hostile text messages she had sent over the last few days, demonstrating a pattern of erratic behavior. "They think you're the weak one," Thomas said on the phone that night, his voice holding a note of professional satisfaction. The betrayed, emotionally devastated husband, easily manipulated. "This is extremely good for us, Liam. Let them underestimate you. Every aggressive move they make only strengthens our position when we demonstrate that you are the rational, controlled party, responding appropriately to provocation." I didn't reply to the letter from Melissa's lawyer. Strategic silence was more effective than any elaborate response could be. Instead, I waited for their next move, knowing instinctively that their impatience would lead them to make mistakes. In long-term financial planning, patience is more than an abstract virtue. It's a concrete strategy that separates successful investors from impulsive amateurs. 2 weeks later, my morning routine of coffee and email review was interrupted by a message from an unknown number. The text was short, cryptic: "Coffee. Important information about the Beacon Cafe on Oak Street. 2 p.m. today. Come alone." My first instinct was to ignore it. It could be a trap, some kind of orchestrated confrontation, maybe even an attempt to make me seem unstable or threatening. But curiosity, that same analytical curiosity that made me good at spotting patterns in financial data, won out over caution. At the appointed time, I was sitting at a corner table in the Beacon Cafe, a stylish establishment with exposed brick walls and soft lighting. I chose a position that allowed me to watch the entire entrance, my back to the wall, a typical precaution for someone who doesn't trust surprises. 10 minutes past 2, fashionably late to create a little tension, a woman in a dark grey pantsuit walked in. She surveyed the cafe methodically, her eyes scanning each table until they found me. I recognized her immediately. Jessica Rhodes, the Director of Human Resources at Pharma Venture. We had met several times over the years at corporate events that Melissa organized or that we were invited to as a couple. Holiday parties, celebrations for meeting sales targets, product launch events. We exchanged polite pleasantries about market trends, commented on the eternal Chicago weather, and superficially discussed interest rates and economic policy. Now, she sat across from me with a serious expression, visible tension in her shoulders. She ordered nothing when the waiter approached, just gave a polite shake of her head. This was not going to be a long conversation. From her black leather executive bag, she took out a small, red flash drive and placed it on the table between us as if it was something dangerous. "Radioactive. I can't be seen with you for long," she said in a low voice, leaning forward slightly. "This conversation never happened, Liam. If anyone asks, we didn't meet. You never saw me." "This flash drive did not come from me. What's on it?" I asked just as quietly, keeping my hands away from the device for now. Emails between Richard and Melissa. Internal communications from the last 14 months, since the affair began. She paused, checking to make sure no one at the nearby tables was paying attention. "Maybe it will be useful for your divorce, maybe not. But you deserve to know the full truth of what's happening." I kept my expression carefully neutral, though my pulse had quickened slightly. "Why are you doing this, Jessica? What's your stake in this?" She glanced around again, a nervous tick of someone who was violating corporate trust and knew the potential consequences. When her eyes returned to mine, there was anger in them, carefully controlled but still very real. "Richard has done this before, 3 times that I know of personally, probably more that I haven't documented. He has a pattern, a specific modus operandi. He preys on married women who work for him, especially those in vulnerable positions or anxious for promotion. He convinces them to leave their husbands with promises of career advancement, relocation to glamorous overseas offices, and the recognition their spouses supposedly don't offer. And then? I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it. As soon as they've completely burned their bridges, destroyed their marriages, and isolated themselves from their support networks, he discards them. He finds some reason to transfer them laterally to less prestigious positions, or worse, create situations that force them to leave the company altogether. She took a deep breath. One of the women, Patricia, attempted suicide afterward. Another developed a serious drinking problem. The third is suing the company for harassment, But the legal department is burying the case because Richard's father is on the board. And Pharma Venture just allows this. I stated, not asked. Jessica's mouth tightened into a thin, bitter line. His father, Robert Price, is one of the largest shareholders. He contributed significant capital during a critical expansion phase 10 years ago. He has veto power on major executive decisions, and he is completely blind to his son's failings or chooses not to see them. She tapped the flash drive with one finger. But there's more at stake now that goes beyond predatory personal patterns. Go on. These emails discuss confidential product information, proprietary research data, information about clinical trials that we later discovered was shared with competing companies. Her voice dropped even lower. The financial implications are enormous. We're talking about industrial espionage, Liam, violation of trade secrets, leaking intellectual property worth millions. A coldness spread through my stomach. Was Melissa a willing accomplice, or had she been manipulated? Jessica shook her head slowly. Honestly, I don't know which, and legally it will matter a great deal. She accessed systems she shouldn't have. She forwarded confidential documents to personal email accounts. She accessed research databases outside of business hours using her credentials. It's all in the system logs. She paused significantly. The FBI is already quietly investigating. They haven't made any overt moves yet, but the investigation is active. And you're giving this to me because you don't deserve to be dragged into the middle of this. Jessica straightened in her chair. And because Richard needs to be stopped before he ruins more lives or causes more damage to the company. Use this information however you need to. Protect yourself, but be discreet about the source. She stood up abruptly, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. I have a meeting in 15 minutes across town. We need to end this now. Jessica, I said before she could leave. Thank you, seriously. She just nodded and left quickly, her heels making a firm sound against the wood floor as she headed for the door. She didn't look back. I sat for a few more minutes, the small red flash drive in front of me seeming much larger than it was. I ordered a double espresso I didn't need, just to justify lingering at the table, and discreetly plugged the device into my laptop. The files were organized chronologically, starting 14 months ago. Hundreds of emails, some with attachments, screenshots, PDF documents. I began to read, and as I went on, the full picture formed like a puzzle being assembled piece by piece. The emails confirmed everything I had already suspected. The affair, obviously, with language that ranged from professional to intimately personal. Richard's promises of a promotion, relocation to Miami, a regional director position with significant autonomy. Melissa's elaborate plans to leave me, discussions about timing, about how to maximize her financial position in the separation. But the industrial espionage angle was completely new, a dimension I hadn't anticipated. Screenshots showed Melissa accessing confidential research systems using her credentials at 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, odd hours that suggested furtive behavior. Emails showed her forwarding PDFs marked confidential internal use only to Richard's personal Gmail address. Whether she fully knew what he was doing with that information, who he was selling it to, wasn't entirely clear. Some emails suggested manipulated naivety. Richard, are you sure this is legal? Followed by, trust me, babe. It's just standard competitive research. Every company does it. But others showed a clearer awareness. In one dated 4 months ago, Melissa wrote, I feel uncomfortable accessing these files. It's not my area and someone might notice. Richard replied, no one is checking these logs. And even if they do, you have a valid excuse. Research for a sales presentation. Just a few more weeks and we'll have everything we need. An exchange from 3 months ago particularly caught my eye. I reread it several times, feeling a cold anger set in. Richard, as soon as you're free of the boring accountant, we're moving forward with everything. The director position for the Miami office is practically a lock. You'll be leading a team of 20. Complete autonomy. Everything you've ever wanted. Melissa, what about his financial expertise? Liam understands investments, tax structures, portfolio optimization. It could be useful for setting up our finances properly in Miami. Richard, trust me, we don't need him. I have my own financial advisors, far more aggressive and creative than your husband could ever be. Just get as much as you can from the joint accounts when you leave, and we'll handle the rest. The more you can secure now, the better positioned you'll be. They had planned not just to leave me, but to use me completely before discarding me. Melissa had seriously considered leveraging my financial knowledge, my professional network, my skills as a consultant for the benefit of her new relationship before Richard dismissed the idea as unnecessary. I was a potential tool to be exploited, nothing more. I copied all the files to an encrypted folder on my hard drive, then to a cloud backup, then to a second flash drive that I kept in a separate location. Redundancy was essential with information this valuable. Then I removed the original device, placed it in the inner pocket of my jacket, and drove directly to Thomas's office. The traffic was hellish on Michigan Avenue, cars at a virtual standstill under the strong afternoon sun. It took me 45 minutes to cover what would normally be a 15-minute drive. The entire way, my mind was processing the implications of what I had read. When I finally arrived, Thomas was finishing a conference call. His secretary offered me coffee while I waited, and I accepted this time, needing the caffeine to stay focused after 2 hours of absorbing disturbing information. He called me in after 10 minutes. I sat down and plugged my flash drive into his laptop without preamble. "You need to see this," I said simply. Thomas spent the next hour and a half reading while I stared out the window at the Chicago skyline. The sun was beginning to set, painting the glass buildings in shades of orange and red. The city pulsed below, millions of people living their lives, completely oblivious to the small personal dramas that felt so immense. "This changes everything," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Completely. The industrial espionage case potentially leading to federal criminal charges. If the FBI is already investigating." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. "Melissa could be looking at prison time, Liam. Not just civil trouble or losing her job. Real prison time." "I don't want her in prison." The words came out before I could fully think them through, surprising myself with their sincerity. "After everything, after the betrayal and the lies and the attempt to rob me financially, I still didn't want to see her completely destroyed. I don't know if it was a vestige of love or just basic humanity, but it was genuine. I just want to get out of this hole, Thomas. Get out clean and move on. Then we use this as maximum leverage," he replied pragmatically, ever the lawyer. "She backs off completely from all financial demands, signs the divorce settlement exactly on our terms without contest, and in return, we don't proactively share this information with the FBI or PharmaVenture. If they come to us, that's different. But we don't initiate contact. And Richard?" I asked, though I already knew my answer. "Do you still care what happens to him?" "No," I answered honestly. "But I do care what happens next to other women he might manipulate. I care about corporate integrity and preventing more damage from being done. Richard needs consequences. Melissa needs a chance to rebuild after being manipulated." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You're more generous than I would be in your position." "It's not generosity, it's pragmatism. Destroying her completely brings me nothing of value. But ensuring she can't harm me financially? That's essential." That evening, alone at home, I received a formal settlement proposal via email from Melissa's lawyer, Charles King. The 17-page PDF was impressively aggressive. Melissa demanded 60% of all marital assets, including the house that was in my name before the marriage, and a continuous monthly alimony of $15,000 for the next 10 years to maintain the standard of living she became accustomed to during the marriage. Their calculations assumed that the frozen joint account contained our only significant assets. They had no idea about the separate trust, about the $870,000 I had protected months before. That ignorance was my greatest advantage. I forwarded the document to Thomas with a single line of text. "Time to use the flash drive. They need to understand their real position." The next day, around 10 a.m., Thomas sent a formal counter-proposal to Charles King. In precise legal language, the document specified that Melissa would renounce all claims to the investment funds, accept a one-time settlement of $50,000 as final compensation, and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding the marriage and all her activities at PharmaVenture. Attached was a single selected email from the flash drive. Just one, chosen carefully to demonstrate that we had substantial information without revealing the full extent of our knowledge. The email showed Melissa forwarding confidential research data to Richard with the comment, "Hope this is what you need." Feeling weird doing this, the implied message was clear. We have a lot more where that came from. The response came in less than 3 hours, an absolute record for legal communication. Charles King requested an urgent in-person meeting to discuss mutually acceptable terms and avoid unnecessary escalation. The meeting was set for Thomas's office 2 days later. I arrived intentionally early, reviewed our strategy meticulously, and waited in the large conference room with its polished mahogany table and panoramic city view. When Melissa entered with Charles King, she was visibly different from the confident woman who had stormed into my house weeks ago. Her clothes were still impeccable, an expensive beige suit, but there were dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't completely hide. She wouldn't look at me directly, keeping her gaze fixed on the table or the windows. King, on the other hand, was all performative confidence. A man in his late 50s with perfectly silvered hair, a $3,000 grey suit, an Italian silk tie, and a practiced smile he probably rehearsed in the mirror. The kind of lawyer who billed by the minute and made sure everyone knew it. "We appreciate your willingness to meet with us," he began in a smooth, professional voice. "We believe we can reach a reasonable agreement that benefits both parties without the need for prolonged and costly litigation." Thomas slid printed copies of our proposal across the polished table. "Our terms are non-negotiable," he said without emotion. "This is our final offer." King scanned the document, his professional smile gradually fading as he read. When he reached the end, he looked up with an expression somewhere between disbelief and carefully calibrated indignation. "This is preposterous," he declared, tapping his fingers lightly on the paper. "Your client is offering essentially nothing, $50,000 after a 15-year marriage. My client contributed significantly to the family's financial success. She deserves fair and adequate compensation. My client is offering silence," Thomas retorted calmly, adjusting his glasses, "which, given the specific and delicate circumstances you are currently facing, is extremely valuable. I would argue it's the most valuable asset being negotiated at this table today." Melissa finally looked at me, and our eyes met for the first time since she walked in. There was a mix of emotions in her eyes I couldn't quite decipher. Anger, certainly, but also fear, and maybe something that looked like remorse, though I could have been projecting. "You're blackmailing me," she said, her voice coming out hoarse and low. "No," I replied with the same calm I had maintained in all our interactions now. "I'm protecting myself, Melissa. Protecting my assets that you tried to steal. Protecting my reputation from false accusations. And offering you a reasonable way out of a situation that could become much worse if not handled properly right now." Thomas opened his leather executive briefcase and took out printed copies of several more selected emails. He placed them precisely in front of King, who began to read with growing discomfort, visible in the tension of his shoulders and the way his jaw tightened. "These are private communications," he objected after a few moments, but his voice had lost much of its earlier authority. "Illegally obtained, I presume. They wouldn't be admissible in court." "They are evidence of corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud," Thomas corrected smoothly, "which federal prosecutors would find extremely interesting. And as for admissibility, well, that would be for a judge to decide. But I'm quite sure the FBI would have its own ways of independently verifying the information contained in these emails." Melissa's composure visibly crumbled. Her hands began to shake, and she clasped them tightly in her lap to hide the tremor. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Richard told me it was just competitive market research, standard industry analysis. Nothing illegal, nothing that could hurt me. He said all the pharmaceutical companies do it. And yet you accessed protected databases outside of business hours," I said calmly, keeping my voice factual and non-accusatory. "You forwarded information marked as confidential to unauthorized personal email accounts. You used your credentials to obtain research data that had no relation to your sales duties." She opened her mouth to respond, but I continued. "The system logs are all there, Melissa. Timestamps, IP addresses, access history. All documented." King leaned toward Melissa, whispering urgently in her ear. She shook her head several times. responding in equally low whispers that I couldn't fully catch. The private conversation stretched for almost 3 uncomfortable minutes, during which Thomas and I waited in patient silence. Finally, King turned back to us, his expression carefully controlled but clearly resigned. "We need to confer privately with my client," he said formally, "to review the available options before proceeding." Thomas nodded graciously. "Of course, take all the time you need." He paused meaningfully, then added almost casually, "The FBI will certainly be taking their time as well when the moment comes. These federal investigations can drag on for years sometimes." The implication was clear. The longer they waited, the more vulnerable they became. They left the conference room, and I could hear their muffled voices from the hallway, Melissa clearly agitated, King trying to soothe her with professional, controlled tones. Thomas gave me a silent nod of approval. "You're holding up well," he commented quietly. "I know this can't be easy, seeing your marriage end like this." "It's not how I expected it to end," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty of the emotion I felt. "We planned a life together, kids, retirement, growing old together in some house in the mountains." She was in all of those plans. Now it's just cold negotiation and legal threats. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Thomas checked emails on his tablet while I watched the city through the window. Seeing helicopters pass between skyscrapers, the endless traffic moving like blood cells through the city's concrete arteries. Finally, they returned. King looked significantly less confident, and Melissa was visibly shaken, her red-rimmed eyes suggesting she had been crying. She sat down without looking at me again, hands still clasped tightly in her lap. "My client is prepared to accept your terms," King said formally, each word sounding as if it caused him physical pain, "with one essential modification. She wants a written, legally binding guarantee that you will not forward these emails to PharmaVenture, to any federal or state law enforcement agency, or to any other party. Total confidentiality regarding the content of these communications." Thomas looked at me, leaving the final decision in my hands as we had previously agreed. This was the crucial moment where I decided how much destruction I was willing to cause. I considered Melissa sitting there, the woman with whom I had once built an entire life. We had celebrated birthdays, weathered professional challenges, comforted each other during the devastating news about infertility. There was real love there once, before the cracks became uncrossable chasms. Whatever she had done, however much she had betrayed me and tried to steal from me, sending her to prison wouldn't undo any of it. It wouldn't bring back the lost years or heal the wounds. It would just be more destruction piled on top of destruction. "I agree," I said finally, "provided the divorce agreement is signed today, processed without any further contests or appeals, and that all claims on any marital assets are permanently waived. No future contact beyond what is strictly necessary to finalize the legal paperwork." King nodded, clearly relieved we weren't pushing for more. "We will need to review the final legal language, ensure all clauses are properly worded and binding." "It's already prepared," Thomas said smoothly, producing a thick document from his briefcase. "My associates worked on it last night. All we need are signatures and witnesses." 2 hours dragged on as we reviewed every clause, every paragraph, every carefully chosen word. King tried to negotiate minor changes several times, but Thomas held firm on every point. The document was fair, he insisted, but it completely protected his client from any future claims or trouble. When it was finally done, signatures applied, witnesses called from reception to validate. Melissa formally gave up all her claims to our assets in exchange for $50,000, payable in a single installment within 30 days, and my guaranteed silence about the emails. The house would be sold within 6 months, with all net proceeds going into the investment trust in my exclusive name. No alimony, no ongoing support, no more contact. The divorce would be processed as no fault, a mutual end to an irreconcilable marriage with no public assignment of blame on either side. As she stood to leave, Melissa paused at the door, turning to look at me one last time. "Was any of it real for you?" The question came out so softly I almost didn't hear it, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been for years. The question caught me completely off guard, disarming the careful defenses I had built over the past few weeks. For a moment, we were back in that hotel conference room in Denver, talking for hours about dreams and ambitions, laughing at inside jokes. planning our future with all the naive hope of young people in love. It was all real for me, I answered with complete sincerity, feeling the weight of every word. Every promise, every plan, every moment we spent building our life. I paused, meeting her eyes. That was the difference between us, Melissa. For me, it was all real. It always was. She nodded slowly, tears finally escaping and running down her careful makeup. Then she left quickly, followed by King, who murmured formal goodbyes before gently closing the door. The silence that remained felt deafening. "Congratulations," Thomas said finally, extending a hand to shake mine. "You'll be officially divorced in 90 business days once the paperwork is processed by the court." "A clean start, Liam." I nodded, feeling a strange emptiness despite the clear victory. I had protected my assets, secured my financial future, and emerged from the situation with all my resources intact. By all objective standards, I had won completely. So why did it feel so hollow? "What about Richard?" I asked after a moment. "He's still there at Pharmaventure. He'll keep doing this to other vulnerable women. Our agreement only protects Melissa and me. It does nothing about him." Thomas considered carefully before replying, taking off his glasses and cleaning them methodically. "Technically, our agreement only prevents you from making direct, identifiable reports regarding Melissa's emails." He paused significantly. "It doesn't cover anonymous reports about general corporate conduct that don't mention her specifically." "I understand," I said slowly, processing the implications. That night, alone in my quiet house, I created a new email account using an anonymous overseas-based service. I spent 3 hours meticulously selecting specific documents from the flash drive, only those that clearly and exclusively showed Richard's actions, his manipulations, his schemes to sell proprietary information, his pattern of predatory behavior. Nothing that mentioned Melissa directly or could be traced back to her. I drafted a careful message explaining the pattern of unethical conduct, attaching supporting documentation, and sent it simultaneously to the CEO of Pharmaventure. 3 selected members of the board of directors, including 2 with no connection to the Price family, and to the head of the corporate compliance department. After triple-checking that nothing could be traced back to me or Melissa, I permanently deleted the email account, cleared my browser history, and even reformatted the original flash drive Jessica had given me. 3 days later, casually browsing the news over breakfast, a small article in the business section of a major news portal caught my eye. Pharmaceutical executive resigns amid internal compliance investigation. Richard August Price had left Pharmaventure, effective immediately. The company cited irreconcilable differences regarding strategic direction and adherence to corporate protocols. No specific reason was officially disclosed, but internal sources mentioned a comprehensive audit of data security practices. My phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Just 5 words. "I know it was you." Melissa. She had connected the dots, realized that only I had access to that specific information. I didn't reply. Some equations balanced themselves, and this one didn't need my confirmation. 6 weeks later, I was in Thomas's office, signing the final divorce papers. The official court-stamped document formally declared the end of our 15-year marriage. Melissa Santos Carter would revert to her maiden name. Liam Carter would continue his life as a single man. Thomas handed me a copy of Melissa's new employment contract, obtained through his extensive network of corporate contacts. She had accepted a position at a small regional pharmaceutical distributor in Omaha, Nebraska, over 500 miles from Chicago. Entry-level sales, practically starting her career from scratch, representing a brutal pay cut of almost 60% compared to what she earned at Pharmaventure. She had to sell her import car to pay for a security deposit and the first few months' rent in Omaha, Thomas commented neutrally. The Mercedes convertible she loved. The $50,000 you paid in the settlement won't last long with the lifestyle she maintained. I felt no satisfaction at this news, as perhaps I should have. Just that dull recognition of financial reality, of actions inevitably leading to proportional consequences. She made her choices, and now she was living with the results of those choices. Simple math. And Richard? I asked, though part of me preferred not to know. Supposedly in Miami, as he always planned. but unemployed and now under active federal investigation. Thomas shuffled some papers. My contacts say the FBI expanded their inquiry after the anonymous tip provided specific direction. He could be looking at formal charges in the coming months. That afternoon, still processing the formal closure of an entire chapter of my life, I received an unexpected registered letter from PharmaVenture. A thick envelope, official letterhead, my name and address typed in formal fonts. Inside was a surprising job proposal. The internal investigation had, through IT forensics, traced my anonymous tip back to me, but instead of taking legal action for accessing proprietary corporate information, they were offering me a senior consultant position in their newly expanded financial compliance department. We believe your expertise in financial analysis, combined with your demonstrated ethical standards and commitment to corporate transparency, would be a valuable asset to our organization during this critical period of restructuring and implementing new security protocols, the formal letter read. Jessica Rhodes had personally signed it as Director of Human Resources, adding a handwritten note in blue ink in the margin. Justice comes in unexpected forms. Would you consider joining us to make sure this never happens again? I studied the proposal carefully that night. The salary was excellent, substantially higher than my current position at Veltri. The responsibilities were challenging and meaningful, genuinely important, rather than just making wealthy clients' assets grow even larger. And there was something compelling about turning this entire painful experience into something constructive. I accepted the offer the next day, starting a month later to allow for a proper transition at Veltri. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, already settled into my new role at PharmaVenture, I received an unexpected email from Vanessa. The subject line simply read, "Thought you should know. Liam, Melissa, and Richard have officially split up. He never came through on any of his promises. No Miami position, no promotion, no future together. He basically abandoned her as soon as she was no longer useful to him, and the investigations began. She's having a really tough time in Omaha, living in a small apartment, working long hours for a modest salary, rebuilding her life from scratch. She's too proud to admit she was wrong or to ask anyone for help. She asked about you casually in a recent conversation. If you were okay, if you'd moved on, if you were dating anyone new. Not like she wanted to get back together, but like she was finally recognizing what she lost. I told her I wouldn't discuss your life with her, that you deserved privacy and peace after everything. I just thought you should know how things ended up for her. And for him. Take care, Liam, you were always too good for her. V. I closed the email without immediately replying. I sat on the balcony of my new home, smaller than the last one, but exclusively mine in a quiet neighborhood, and considered everything that had happened. The justice, I realized, wasn't in Melissa's downfall or my preserved financial security. It was in the quiet restoration of truth. The numbers finally balancing as they should have from the beginning. The consequences aligning properly with the actions that caused them. The revenge was never about taking something from her or deliberately destroying her life. It was finally recognizing my own worth, understanding that I deserved better than lies and betrayal, that my stability, my loyalty, my consistent integrity had real value even if she couldn't see it. A full year after that late-night call from Melissa in Miami, I stood in the entryway of my new house in a tree-lined Chicago neighborhood. The property was smaller than our old brownstone, but perfectly suited to my needs. Modern and efficient, with a small back deck that offered a view of the city lights at night. The consulting work with PharmaVenture had evolved beyond the initial expectations into a full-time executive role, heading the entire division of financial compliance and corporate ethics. I had built a dedicated team of 8 professionals, all committed to transparency, rigorous oversight, and preventing the kinds of abuses that Richard had perpetrated. The work mattered in a way that moving rich clients' money between funds never had. I was protecting people, protecting institutional integrity, building systems that prevented manipulation and exploitation. My phone vibrated with a text from Catherine, a corporate lawyer I had met through PharmaVenture's legal department 3 months ago. Our 4th date was scheduled for tonight. Dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, where we could continue our fascinating conversations about pharmaceutical regulation, hiking trails, and the comparative merits of different long-term investment strategies. Topics that would have bored Melissa to tears, but which Catherine found just as interesting as I did. She shared my appreciation for careful analysis, methodical planning, and the quiet satisfaction of doing things the right way, even when no one was watching. I hadn't heard from Melissa directly in months. Through the informal network of mutual acquaintances, I learned she had left the pharmaceutical industry entirely after a difficult year in Omaha. She had taken a teaching position at a small community college in rural Nebraska, teaching basic sales techniques and business communication to management students. A dramatically simpler life than she had planned or imagined. But perhaps I hoped a more honest one, more genuine, free from the consuming ambitions that had led her to sacrifice everything that truly mattered. As I adjusted my tie in the hall mirror, I realized the persistent feeling of emptiness I had carried for months had finally completely disappeared, replaced by something lighter. Not exuberant happiness, but stable contentment, peace. The betrayal no longer defined me. It didn't control my thoughts or emotions. It had simply become part of my story, a painful but completed chapter that had paradoxically led to something unexpectedly better. I locked the door behind me and walked to my car. The investment trust that Melissa had desperately tried to empty that March night now funded scholarships for students in business ethics and accounting. 3 full scholarships a year for promising young people who demonstrated not just technical competence, but strong character. A small way of turning what was meant to hurt into something constructive and lasting. Pain converted into opportunity for others. Betrayal transformed into education. The most satisfying ending possible. The city stretched out before me as I drove through the familiar streets. Chicago pulsed with its characteristic chaotic energy. Millions of lives interwoven in complex, unpredictable patterns. But within all that complexity, there were constants. Fundamental truths. Numbers didn't lie. Actions had proportional consequences. Integrity mattered in the long run, even when it seemed costly in the short term. People who held to their principles, even in difficult circumstances, eventually found their way to something better. I had been right about the numbers all along. That was never in doubt. But more importantly, I had finally gotten the human equation right too. Understood that my value wasn't determined by someone else's ability to recognize it. That worthiness wasn't negotiable or conditional. The future opened up ahead, uncertain in its details but fundamentally sound. Built on an honest foundation this time. No lies, no hidden betrayals, no unbalanced equations waiting to collapse, just possibilities. And the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the storm and emerged stronger, wiser, and finally, whole.